In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains the dynamic of power in society and between individuals.
Foucault makes this fundamental case that there's no real truth, and that what passes as truth is the dominant opinion of the dominant group. And by dominant, he means those that hold the power. And so that's a hell of a pessimistic view of the world, and it's wrong. It's wrong, and it's seriously wrong. And I'm gonna lay out why it's wrong. I mean, first of all, it doesn't even work for kids. You know, if you look at how kids organize themselves on the playground, there are bullies, and it's interesting, if you study bullies, you find out that they're not necessarily the most unpopular kids. There are outcast kids who are more unpopular than the bullies. And the bullies are ambivalently popular. They have some friends and they have some enemies. So, so it's not entirely counterproductive to be a bully. But it starts working less and less well as you get older, and so it's not doing so well by the time you hit junior high. And by the time you're at high school, it's not a very effective strategy at all. And a bully is someone who uses power. It's like, bloody well do what I want, or I'll hit you. Or I'll do something else that you won't like that will be physical, or maybe it'll be psychological. But if the psychology doesn't work, calling you names, demeaning you, talking behind your back, which is a very common form of female bullying, because females have their own forms of bullying and they're very effective. If that doesn't work, then I can just take you out of the schoolyard and pound you. And if I can't pound you myself, well, then I'll pound you with one of my friends, and that'll be just as effective. And you'll bloody well do what I want you to do. And that's power. And it's like, really? That's the basis of our society? That sort of power? That's how we organize ourselves? I mean, it's patently ridiculous. First of all, most children who are popular, let's say, universally popular, and who do well socially, aren't bullies. They're good at playing with others. And they learn that between the age of 2 and 4. And they learn very straightforward rules, like reciprocity. That's the big one. There's a couple. Reciprocity is one. Trust is another, to abide by your word. But those are the same thing. Reciprocity and trust are very similar. It's like, well, we'll take turns. You play my game now, and I'll play your game tomorrow. And you guys have had friends that were real friends, and you know perfectly well that if you have a good friend, you don't have to keep track exactly of what you do for each other. You don't write it down on a piece of paper and put a check mark beside it, unless you're a little bit on the paranoid side, and that's only the beginnings of your problems. And what you do is, you kind of keep track of who does what for who, and you kind of keep the balance equal. And you do that because, well, that's what you do if you're awake and conscious and a decent person. And if you have a relationship, if you're in a marriage, it's the same thing. It's like you don't obsessively keep track of who owes what, when, and why. That's a sign of a degenerating relationship. What you do is, well, you do what you can for your partner, and they do what they can for you, and you're both aware of that, and you assume goodwill, and with any luck, that iterates across time, and it's a sustainable game. It's not bloody power. And there's nothing more miserable than being in a relationship where the rule is, do what the hell I want or suffer the consequences. And what kind of relationship are you going to get out of that? Even if the person is cowed enough to do what you want them to do, when you're there and enforcing it, they're not going to put their whole heart into it. That's bloody well for sure. They're going to be, if they have any sense at all, and they do, and if they have any spirit at all, and they do, they're going to be undermining what you're forcing them to do all the time. There's an old Soviet joke. They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. Right, great. That's a hell of a way to run a society. And that's exactly how that society ran. So all you do with force is engender bitterness and resentment. And if the person that you're exerting force on can't exert the same level of physical force back, it's not like they're not going to take their revenge in other ways. They're not going to cook you wonderful meals. They're not going to be, what would you call it, enthusiastic sexual partners. You know, they're going to get their revenge when they can, unless you've crushed their spirit completely. And then it serves you right, because then you're dragging around behind you someone whose spirit you've crushed completely. And that's a hell of a way to live. And so what is this idea that our society is fundamentally predicated on power? You know, and that's the postmodern claim. We group ourselves into our groups, whatever the hell they happen to be, sex, gender, ethnicity, whatever the flavor of the month is. There's an infinite number of ways we could group ourselves, and then we organize ourselves into power hierarchies and we dominate each other. And then all of those groups go to war against one another, and the most dominant group that has the most power wins. It's like, I don't know what the hell planet Foucault grew up on. You know, that might be the definition of like the worst African dictatorship of the last 100 years. But it's not a description of our society. And it's not a description of the way that people organize themselves into hierarchies, which was the point I was trying to make in Rule 1 when I talked about hierarchies. Now, it's very important where you are in your hierarchical position with regards to other people in relationship to your mental health. And this is a really important thing to understand, because you have an ancient counter in your brain, and that was the point of the biological comparisons, and lobsters being one set of comparisons, but not only lobsters. We know perfectly well, animal behaviorists, people who know their neuropsychopharmacology, know perfectly well that the serotonergic system operates quite similarly across most animals with complex nervous systems, and one of the things that it does is track relative status position. And in birds, wrens, which is another example I used, a lot of it is power. You know, a wren's a little bird. It's quite a cute bird. It sings very nicely, and you think it's harmless, but it's not. It's a vicious little character. And I used to sit in my backyard and record wren songs on my tape recorder, and the wren that lived in our backyard would dive bomb it, you know, 4 inches away, and it was very brave of him. And he had a little nest that was up in a tree, and there were some nests that we had built, birdhouses, in the neighborhoods nearby, in the yards nearby. And he would go, like half his day spent stuffing those other birdhouses with sticks, so full that no bird could get in them. You know, it was like, this is my damn yard, which is what he was saying when he was singing so beautifully. And you better look the hell out, because if you build, I'm going to stuff your damn house with sticks, and if I see you sitting on a branch, I'm going to dive bomb you and knock you off. And that's power, and that's what wrens do, despite the fact that they're cute. And chickens do the same thing. There are pecking orders among chickens, and virtually every animal. Wolf packs organize themselves into hierarchies, and chimpanzees organize themselves into hierarchies, and like, there are rat hierarchies, and hierarchical organization is the rule among animals that live somewhat socially, and even those who don't, that occupy the same geographical territory. There has to be some way of organizing access to relatively scarce resources that doesn't result in chronic combat. Because chronic combat, well, look, you're wren A and you're wren B, and you decide to have it out, so you peck yourselves half to death, and you're wren C, and so you got a little bit more patience. You just wait until those two wrens beat each other to death, and then you move in. It's like, it's a stupid solution. It doesn't even work for wrens, let alone people. And so, you know, the wrens announce their prowess, and they do that with the quality of their song and their displays, and they indicate to one another who shouldn't be messed with, and then there's a minimum of combat. And you could make a pretty good case that that's power,